American agricultural products are now and have been for many years playing an important part in feeding the world's hungry. Ron Wilson, chief of the donations branch of USDA's Agricultural Stabilization and Conservation Service, is here to talk with us about that today. Ron, what activity is the U.S. currently engaged in feeding the world's hungry, and about how many countries are we in?
First, the Title II program, PL 480, is administered by the Agency for International Development within the State Department. They approve programs in countries exceeding 50 to where the U.S. Department of Agriculture buys and ships commodities to seaports where they are later loaded aboard a ship and delivered to the foreign country. We procure the commodities by either direct purchases from suppliers or either we provide commodities from CCC inventory. At the present time, we're providing non-fat dry milk and rice from our inventories that we have acquired through our CCC price support programs.
Ron, who pays for all this?
Well, CCC buys and pays for the commodity and the transportation, and we're later reimbursed from funds that are appropriated by Congress.
How does the Agency for International Development enter into this?
The Agency for International Development is the agency charged with the responsibility of the administration of the program, approving the commodities, approving the countries to where we will be shipping the commodities to.
Now, who does the actual distribution when the commodity reaches the country in question?
The commodities are distributed by the voluntary relief agencies such as CARE Incorporated, Catholic Relief Services, Seventh-day Adventist, Church World Service, and Lutheran World Relief. They're distributed by the World Food Program, headquartered in Rome, and in some instances, the government-to-government programs that we have between our government and the government of the host country.
Now, what foods are we talking about primarily?
At the present time, we have 15 commodities that we ship. They're basically made up of raw ingredients including wheat and feed grains, non-fat dry milk, rice, and edible vegetable oils.
And they're delivered to these countries. I understand that recently you've had to divert some to Cambodia. Is that true?
That's correct. The emergency in Cambodia has caused us to divert commodities that are already on the high seas in some instances so we could meet the emergency that exists there. We will later go back and procure commodities that we have diverted for the original countries.
Give us an example of some of these emergencies other than Cambodia that you've had to meet in recent years.
Well, in this year, for example, we've had emergencies created by the hurricanes that came through the South American countries, the Nicaraguan political emergency, and now, most recently, the Cambodian emergency.
Is this money appropriated by Congress on a yearly basis? Do you know how much you're going to have to spend, in other words?
Yes, it's appropriated on a yearly basis, a fiscal year basis. We're charged with the responsibility of staying within those budget limitations that Congress have established.
Of those 17 commodities that you ship each year, Ron, what are the big ones? What are the most important ones these countries need?
Well, at the present time, we ship commodities that are high in protein. The largest commodity that we ship in volume is a commodity called soy-fortified bulgur. That's a processed wheat where 15% soy flakes has been added to the commodity to bring the protein level up.
Okay, thanks very much, Ron Wilson. Ron is chief of the donations branch of USDA's Agricultural Stabilization and Conservation Service, talking about feeding the world's hungry today. I'm Earl Clayton with the Department of Agriculture in Washington.
year ending last September 30th, our agricultural exports reached a record $32 billion. With me to look at the projections for the current year is Fred Wells, Assistant General Sales Manager for the Department of Agriculture. Fred, do you anticipate another record year?
Yes, we do, Don. I think right now our projections show about a $37 billion export level for this upcoming year, which would be about a 16% increase over the previous year that you just mentioned.
Do you anticipate increases in certain areas as far as commodities or new markets opening up in certain parts of the world?
Well, I think that total figure obviously represents all exports. I think a particular interest in the grains area, we're thinking of looking at export increases of about 17%, and also in the soybean area as far as soybeans themselves and also soybean meal, that there should be increases in that area likewise. As far as new markets, we're working again with the developing countries where the population growth rates are still outstripping the local production rates, so that there's continually increasing demand. And the question is whether or not they have the financial capability to purchase these imports.
Our agreement with the Soviet Union allows them to purchase up to 25 million metric tons of grain this year. Do you feel that the Soviets will reach that level?
I believe they will. Our figures that we have published as of just a day or so ago indicate that about 10 million tons have already been purchased, and we would expect that before this year is completed, this fiscal year that is, the year of the agreement, that they will certainly buy up to the 25 million tons.
In recent years, India has become a net exporter of wheat. However, a drought in that country this year resulted in a wheat shortfall. Will they, one, be able to export, and two, will they be able to meet their own demands? And then what does this mean for us?
Well, I think the drought question certainly is an important one for both India and ourselves. The Indian government in September, I believe, made a decision to stop exports of grains, recognizing that they may have some more greater needs inside the country. And now we're also hearing some reports that possibly they may enter into the import side of the business again later on next year. But it's still not clear what the final effects of the droughts will be on local production. They have a fair amount of grain stocks of about 20 million tons. But here again, it's not sure as to how much of that is available and how easily it could be distributed.
What other factors are affecting or will affect our export picture this year?
Well, I think these drought conditions both in the Indian subcontinent, Indochina area, as well as in southern Africa, western Africa, together with the number of the refugee situations that seem to be cropping up in many parts of the world, the Cambodia situation being the one that you hear the most about in the press recently, but you also have areas in western Africa, in eastern Africa, as well as parts of southern Africa. So I think combining the droughts and also a somewhat drop in production from the drought and other factors will result in increased demand for food.
So again, we hope to have a record year of perhaps $38 billion.
Yes, we do. We certainly are working on that figure.
Thank you very much. We've been talking with Fred Wells, Assistant General Sales Manager of the Department of Agriculture. I'm Don Elder for the USDA in Washington.
Moving American agricultural products to market in an efficient manner is a major concern which has been studied by a special Rural Transportation Advisory Task Force for the past several months. The task force is preparing its final recommendations now, and we have Ron Schrader of the U.S. Department of Agriculture to kind of highlight some of the key recommendations that task force will be making. Ron is director of the Office of Transportation for the Department of Agriculture. And Ron, there are, of course, many major points that this 16-member advisory board tackled. But first of all, let's talk about the rail issues of it.
Well, we have two major issues that we're trying to confront, and that's the rail car shortage problem, which has existed for 2 years, and the rail line abandonment question. With respect to the car shortage problem, we're not certain it's a shortage so much as it is a utilization problem. When these cars get into terminals such as Kansas City, St. Louis, and others, they seem to get lost for 10 or 15 days at a time. We also have over 25,000 miles of trackage in the Midwest that's under slow order because of the poor maintenance conditions on those trackage. On those tracks, and so as a result you can't run those trains more than 10, 9, 8 miles per hour. So we're trying to put in recommendations that will help to solve some of those kinds of problems, which we think will ultimately solve the car shortage question.
In your review of this situation, did you actually find out what percentage of time those rail cars that we do have are used?
It is estimated about 25 days out of 365 you have a car loaded and on its way to market. So it's about a 7% usage figure.
So one
horrendous.
of the key areas then is utilizing what we have in a better way.
Right. If we had 20,000 additional cars now, I'm not sure we could use them efficiently. I'm certain they'd get stuck somewhere in the system. So we have to utilize those cars better.
Now let's turn our attention a little bit to highway truck transportation of farm products.
Well, that's another major area of concern, and I guess the task force has narrowed in on 2 or 3 major issues. The one most important is the fact that so many states have different rules and regulations, licensing requirements, and so on. We have 10 states, or 11 states, I believe it is, in this country that have weight limitations of 72,300 pounds. The rest of the country is at 80,000 pound weight limitation. Which means that a truck traveling from California to New York must travel at about 80% of its capacity to go through these barrier states. So I suspect that the task force will be recommending that some uniformity be put into effect, weight, length, state licensing requirements, so that truckers don't have to stop in each state, get new licenses, and change various regulations that they have imposed on them.
And there's quite a lot of shipment of American farm products by waterways in this country.
Right. 40% of our grain exports go by water. And so that's a very important element in our discussion. The Mississippi River, of course, is the most important one, and Loxon Dam 26, which is located right at the confluence of the Illinois River and the upper Mississippi River near St. Louis, is a severe bottleneck. It has about half the capacity of the upper Mississippi and Illinois system and about half the capacity of the system below it. The lock is going to be replaced. The legislation passed a year or so ago, but it's been held up in the courts. And this task force is probably going to recommend that an accelerated construction schedule be put into effect, and perhaps 2 locks rather than just 1.
Thank you, Ron Schrader, for bringing us up to date on rural transportation. I'm Larry Quinn for USDA in Washington. characteristics of U.S. farms today are changing. Is this the beginning of a revolution in the way that we produce our food and fiber for the future? With us today to take a look at agriculture today in the United States is Dr. Lyle Schertz. He's an economist with the U.S. Department of Agriculture. And Dr. Schertz, the number of farms has been declining for several decades. Is this a trend that goes on?
It certainly has gone on for many years in this country, and the farm numbers have declined, and in many cases the resources that were with the smaller farms have been consolidated into larger farms. The rate of change, however, in terms of numbers have slowed in recent years. Another important aspect with respect to the change is that changes occur in different ways at different times. You know, the 1950s was very much a period in which the poultry production had a tremendous transformation with respect to moving from farm flocks into the very large units, relatively large units that we see today. In more recent years, such as in the 70s, the beef feeding experienced a considerable change. Now, there's some thought and certainly some observation of change in size of crop production as the larger machinery comes into place in some of, say for example, in the Corn Belt. The Far West has had large farms with large equipment for a considerable period of time.
I suppose the changing definition of what just is a farm has had something to do with the actual numbers that we're counting.
Well, certainly. But in spite of the changes of the definition of farms over a period of time, nonetheless, the fact remains, it seems to me, that the number of farms have declined, that they have become relatively larger, and very much associated with that transformation is a change in the mix of resources that are brought together in the individual farm production units. Substitution of capital for labor and to some extent for land, for example, being a very primary change that has occurred as people have gone out of farming into other activities in the non-farm sector.
Do you see these trends as desirable for agriculture?
Well, I have personal attitudes, obviously, toward the desirability of these developments or that. But my professional responsibility is not in terms of considering whether they're desirable or not, but in terms of identifying what is going on, why they have occurred, and what some of the implications are, and hopefully to anticipate a bit as to what might happen in the future.
We've had changes that have been drastic effects on American agriculture in our history. Is this kind of the beginning of the third revolution in agriculture?
Well, historians identify two revolutions in American agriculture. One where the horses replaced the human labor, and that brought very dramatic changes that made it possible for much larger production units and what have you. And the second revolution they identify is the replacement of those horses with tractors. And again, that certainly brought dramatic change. Now, whether we're going through another revolution or not, I don't know, and it's not really too important whether we call it a transformation revolution or not. But it strikes me that the very fundamental to the current developments is the changes in the way we organize and manage resources. And it's that characteristic that you see in, say, for example, the large beef feeding lots, where up to maybe 200,000 heads that they'll put through those lots in a year.
Thank you for being with us, Dr. Lyle Schertz. I'm Larry Quinn with the U.S. Department of Agriculture reporting from Washington. Is the small farm fading slowly from the rural scene, or will it continue to be the way that we produce most of our food and fiber in the years ahead? With us to address the question of what's ahead for U.S. agriculture is Dr. Lyle Schertz, who is an economist with the U.S. Department of Agriculture. And let's look forward a little bit, Dr. Schertz. A lot of changes have taken place in agriculture in the first 200 years of our country. Are we going to see something totally spectacularly different than what we've experienced in the past?
Well, I suspect our best judgment is that we will see a continuation of the trends, and if you put those together, essentially you come down to thinking that the small farms, the number of small farms, will probably continue to be about what they are today. In other words, the decline of the past few years as it slowed will tend to level off. The middle-sized farms will probably decline. The larger farms will probably increase in numbers and increase concentration of production among those larger farms.
But the small farm is not going to disappear altogether.
No, certainly not. The combination of various forces, but particularly the combination of combining farm and non-farm activity is an important aspect of we think, leading to a continuation of some of the smaller farms.
Is it going to be a technological change on the farm, or is it going to be more in how we operate the farms that will be the biggest difference in the years ahead?
Well, technology continues to change. There is certainly a lot of questions with respect to how fast it will change in the future, and the future obviously is not known with clarity. But the dramatic changes that I tend to observe and think about is the combination of changes in the organization and management associated with changes of technology. And it seems to me that's perhaps, if there is a revolution going on in U.S. farming, it's that revolution, the revolution in organization and management.
What kind of factors are going to have the greatest amount of influence on what agriculture will be like, say, 10, 20 years down the road?
Well, when we look back, which I think is important in looking forward, we identify several different factors. Some of them, though, include, for example, inflation, the export volumes that we've experienced, the credit availabilities, the tax policies, the commodity policies, and others, and certainly those forces will continue. But as you think about the future, undoubtedly inflation and energy and tax policies, we tend to think, inject new uncertainties into the situation.
So public policy is going to be very much a part of agriculture in the future. In fact, it has been in the past.
That's right. That's right. Now, and certainly these changes are a challenge to the implementation of public policy.
Why is there such an interest in the future of agriculture?
The way we use our farm resources has been of interest to Americans for a long time. It goes back to the immigrants. In fact, they left their countries in many cases because of their dissatisfaction with the way they shared in those farm assets and the income streams associated with it. The Alexander Hamilton, Thomas Jefferson debates, another one. We fought a war, in fact, related to this type of question, the Civil War. And it relates to the wealth that people have, the assets that they own, and the income streams associated with it.
Thank you, Dr. Lyle Schertz, for being with us and taking a forward look at U.S. farming. I'm Larry Quinn reporting for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington.